Now enter into the 11th parak in Sefer Shoftim, and the story is unbelievably intriguing and sad and chivalrous all at the same time. So many different pieces here as we move on to our next topic. I named this parak Finding an Opening because the name of our shofet is going to be very significant to the story that he leads, which is Yiftach, which means to open. He will open. And the question is, what does he open and what does he not open? But let's start off. So I actually am very fond of this particular Torah, this particular parak, because it is my haftorah for my bar mitzvah. So I remember learning this when I was 13 years old. It is the haftorah for which parasha? Machlokes. Very good. Okay, good. It's good. My mother's in the room. She also knows it off by heart. So here we go. Let's jump straight in. So we hear about this individual called Yiftach. He comes from Gilad, and he was a gibor chayil. He is a strong man, but v'hu ben isha zona. He's got some sort of question in his lineage. We'll address this in a second. And Gilad gives birth to this young man called Yiftach, but he has other brothers who are legitimate brothers, and these other brothers are not so pleased with the mother of their half-brother and the lineage, and therefore they vayegarshu es Yiftach, and they kick him out of the house. Vayamru lo, and of course it all comes down to money, right? Which is vayamru lo lo tinchal beveis avinu ki ben isha acheres ata. You're not going to be party to our inheritance. You're not part of the estate. You come from a different wife, and so you're out. And so they make his life impossible. He leaves, and that's what happens. He goes to a place called Eretz Tov, which literally means the good land. And there, Vayislakatu el Yiftach anashim rikim, and empty people, thank you so much, if anybody needs, empty people join Yiftach there. Okay, so we have these empty people. You can imagine, these are probably other people who were rejected by society for whatever reason, right? These are people who also perhaps had family trouble, perhaps had trouble with some law enforcement issues in their past, or people who have issues with society, and they find their way to being disenfranchised, and all these people feel very unhappy with society. They gather together, they create a band, and they sort of live in this Eretz Tov area. Okay, this is what we have. So a few things just before we go further is, let's talk about his lineage. So we said he's a Ben Isha Zona. Zona, literally translated as is understood by the Mitzuros, is a Zona is a prostitute. So this was an illegitimate. This was a person who was born out of wedlock, not a perfect circumstance that we're dealing with over here. You can understand the brother's relationship to him is complex. However, that's not the only reason. No possibility. The other possibility could be this is always the way we teach Nach to children, is the innkeeper, right? By the way, it is actually one of the translations, Puddekissa, right? So she has a like Barachav is a similar kind of situation. So this is a woman, or perhaps a Pilegesh, even a woman who doesn't have the same level of security in marriage is also a possibility. Okay, but I'd like to suggest a third possibility, which I found in the Rabbeinu B'chaye at the end of Sefer Bamidbar. What is that referring to? If you go to the end of Sefer Bamidbar, there is a mitzvah, which is a mitzvah l'sha'ah. This is an unusual thing, where the nation of Israel commanded on a mitzvah that was only one generational. Is that interesting? Most mitzvahs we know are binding intergenerationally. They don't have a statute of limitation, but there are a number of mitzvahs which are specifically for one generation. What was that mitzvah? So the mitzvah comes from the context of the daughters of Tzlafchad. The daughters of Tzlafchad make an upheaval in inheritance law in Parshas Pinchas. The law is changed on the books about Bas Yoreshes Nachla, about women inheriting. But then it becomes an issue, because practically speaking, we're going to have a real issue. The nation of Israel is going to come into the land of Israel. They're going to divide the tribal territories. And then, let's say you have a family of daughters like Tzlafchad, and they're going to meet very fine, dashing, and handsome suitors from the tribes of Yisachar, Zvulun, and Dan, right, as an example. They're going to marry. Let's say in this case they bring with them the real estate, the assets of their tribal inheritance, which is Menashe, right? They're going to now bring with them that inheritance. Let's say they predecease their husband, then those assets go to now a new tribe, and from now on inwards they're going to belong to Yisachar, Zvulun, and Dan, right, whoever they marry. So the Torah prescribes a mitzvah, which is as follows. Take a look at where the Torah says this in source 4. We'll call Bas Yoreshes Nachla, any daughter inherits Mimatois B'nei Yisrael Echad Mimishpachas Matei Aviyat Tiel Isha. She should marry within her tribe to prevent what's called loisisov nachala, that we don't take the real estate of one tribe, because now what you're going to have is you're going to have pockets of real estate in a particular tribe which really belong to another tribe because of the marriage and the inheritance of the daughters. This is a mitzvah l'shah. This was only binding for one generation. In fact, so much so that we know when this mitzvah ended, when the end of this generation finally passed away, it was on Tu B'Av. This is one of the 6 reasons we celebrate Tu B'Av, is when this mitzvah reached the end and anybody could marry each other. Right? This is just, I'll leave you with a question, is why would the book of Bamidbar close with such a unique mitzvah, right? A limited mitzvah. But be it as it may, the Rebbeinu B'Chaye says, the residue of that mitzvah remains, which means, even though technically speaking, we are 300 years since then, and this mitzvah is no longer in effect, but what happened was there became a taboo on marrying outside of your tribe. And even though it wasn't a binding mitzvah, people kind of looked down at somebody who dated somebody else. I always say this, like it's important, for Long Island boys to date Long Island girls, just because the wedding's in New Jersey, but that's not that, right, across state lines, But no, that's not how it works. People meet each other. They go to wherever it is, the yeshiva, the seminary, the university, and they meet each other. And that's what happens, they meet each other. But in those days it was looked down upon. And therefore they called Yiftach. She was from a mother from a different tribe, completely legitimate. The marriage was complete and secure, but the brothers said, you come from a different tribe, and they pushed him out. Now, I'll make an ironic comment over here. Here you have a nation who we just heard about a chapter ago, was a nation that is not necessarily respecting their fidelity to the Almighty, but yet they still hold on to the cultural taboos about fidelity within marriage. There's an irony which we should feel over here, which is a sad point. It's a sad point. They've got the wrong sense of prioritization if they're kicking out half brothers based on this, but they're not caring about the other. Their father in heaven in the same way. There's other idols which are making their way. And there's a sad irony over here. Okay, so just a quick thing about where's Eretz Tov. Tov literally means good. Some of the Mepharshim say that this refers to a place that is tax-free in certain ways. What does that mean? Take a look at the Talmud Yerushalmi, source 6. The Yerushalmi says, Amar Yeshua ben Levi, Ksiv vayivrach Yiftach min penei Yaakov vayeser be'Eretz Tov, zu susisa. V'lama nikra shmo Tov, sheyiftar min ha'ma'asrot. It's not technically part of conquered Israel. And as a function of that, if you're a farmer there and you produced prior grain, you would not necessarily need to tithe it and give it to the Levium and trim it to the Kohanim, because it wasn't part of Israel proper. This is kind of like, a person buying real estate, out in one of those countries where it's tax-free, and if you live there long enough, then you can make sure that that's what's happening here, right? So he's going to a place where all those types of people will find a way to find the tax loop. They don't need to live in this place. Where is Sosita? So it's actually today it's called Hippos, which is a Greek name of the city here. It's on the other side of the Kinneret. So I put in the map over here, which is, you see the Sea of Galilee. We're used to going on the side of Tiberia. When the opposite side is Hippos, and I put a picture of it. It's actually really a high escarpment, you can see, because remember, this is the Golan Heights. This is the heights looking down onto it. That's the remains of this city. That's where Eretz Tov is, according to many. That's what the Mefarshim say. So this is where he goes. This is northern. This is Bashan area, literally. The Golan Heights today is where Bashan was. In those old days, this is where Og inhabited. So he says he's in this area. It's not technically part of the tithable land of Israel. Okay. Now, up till now, this is a family drama, right? This has nothing to do with Jewish history, right? This is the kind of thing that could happen in any family. but nonetheless, it reaches national scale because of the next conversation. Because what happens is that we know that right now the antagonist over here is the nation of Ammon. They come and they conquer the area in the east bank of the Jordan. They start making entrenchments in Israel West Bank. And so the elders of Gilad turn to Yiftach. They know that he's a strong man. They know that he has a fighting force who surrounds him. And they go and they send messengers to him. And they said and in Pasuk Vav, Vayomru leYiftach lecha vayisa lanu lekatzin v'nilchama bivnei Ammon. Come fight, you'll be a katzin, you'll be an officer, is the word that's used in the Israeli army today. A katzin is an officer. You'll be an officer, and you will lead us. Okay. And Yiftach turns to him in disgust, and he says, whether you are my brothers or whether you're complicit or ignoring the actions of my brothers, you hated me, you rejected me. Why do you come to me now when it's just difficult for you? That's not the appropriate manner of behavior. They make more concessions. They say, no, you'll be a rosh, you'll be a katzin. Finally, he agrees, and he agrees to their terms. He gives given a higher pedestal of leadership, and he then turns to them and he says, "Vadeber Yiftach," in the last pasuk, it's called Devarav Livnei Hashem b'Mitzpah. So he brings their words back to Mitzpah, which is the congregation place of Israel in the west bank of the Jordan, and he now agrees to be a leader. So we have this smoothing over of the family conflict. So first of all, just notice over here is that we're now no longer dealing with an Osniel ben Knaz with the blue blood of Judea. We're no longer dealing with Devorah, who's a prophetess. We're dealing with a person who, for whatever reason, has questionable lineage, right? That's the cut of leader that we're dealing with. This reflects the generation. Leader, a lot of people blame leaders. They say, how can we have such a low level of a leader? Usually it's a reflective of the generation that produced such a leader, right? So that's unfortunately what's happening over here is that we're watching now in terms of the trending. Israel is trending downwards. And therefore the leaders they're going to produce are trending downwards as well. We're not dealing with yesteryear's leaders, just in terms of that. And when we get to Shimshon, we'll see even more complex when it relates to this. But let's go a little further. So what's the debate? What's the negotiation? So if you look at the words carefully, their proposition is you should be a katzin. The Malbim actually makes the note, and I never thought about this before, but the word katzin we translate as an officer, but what does it technically mean? Katz means an end or an edge. So he says a person who's a katzin is a person who's on the edge of society. If you think about like the bell curve, he's in the 2%, right? Whether it's because of wealth or because of attributes or because of strength. He sort of sits on the side because he is unique from the rest of the humdrum, the rest of the populace, right? That's who he is. So they say, look, we want an officer in the army. We want somebody who's going to lead us into battle. But for all their intents and purposes, we have an issue in front of us, which is we have aggression on the eastern flank. Sort it out for us, and then go back to Tov and keep building your real estate empire beyond the tax bracket, right? That's kind of like their proposition. And in Yiftach turns to him, and I just the words of the Malbim are so stinging in the 9th source. I'm going to read for the second line. He says, "Zos shenis." He says, secondly, he says in the second line of the Malbim in source 9, he says, "She'im hayisim ba'im elai be'es shalva hayisim ochel ala avar." If you came to me, the skies are clear, there's no problems, and you said, look, Yiftach, we really want you back in. He said, I'd let bygones be bygones. Aval atem bosem elai ato rak kasher tzalochem be'ofen shloi hina'achem haina hacharata alavar v'loi ava havachashivut. You don't care. You're not trying to make good. You're just desperate right now. And I hear over here the words of God. Like this is the same conversation we heard a chapter ago with God. What happened is the nation of Israel go and serve 7 different deities. They leave God all behind. Then Hashem sends these oppressors and they call out, God, please help us. And God says, speak to those deities. That's what Hashem said. Speak to those pagan shrines. It'll be all right for you, right? What's God saying? You're not reaching out to me because you care about me. You're reaching out because you care about you. And that's what he's saying as well. It's amazing is that this is the microcosm. It's the same conversation happening again, just now on the smaller scale. And in a certain sense, I wonder if God set this up in such a way for them to be able to hear it. Because sometimes when we speak to God, we don't hear these things. But when you speak to our fellow, then suddenly there's as I say, nafala asimon, right? We realize that, wait a second. And maybe they're meant to realize this and learn the lesson as well. What do they ultimately do? They don't offer him the position of katzin. They say l'rosh u'lekatzin. Rosh means to say is that after the war is finished, we're going to have you as our leader. That's a really big and humiliating step for people who've had to now reject him, now to embrace him. So there's a significant shift in what's being said over here. And he agrees to this. He now walks in, and now he takes on the leadership as a full rosh, not just a katzin, not just as an officer. So the one thing I thought was intriguing over here is that he goes, before this all happens, he goes to Mitzpah and he speaks their word in front of God. Why does he need to speak their word in front of God precisely? So the Malbim says that the reason is because this is, if you remember, and it's hard to say remember, but I'm sure we've all studied Sefer Shmuel, which we're going to get to. In Sefer Shmuel, when the first king is established, the coronation place is Mitzpah. It's the major gathering place of the people. So in a certain sense, he's ratifying his leadership in the same way that future ratification will occur. But there's more than that as well. And that is that where the nation of Israel, says the Radak, is, where the nation of Israel are, that's where the Shechin, that's where Hashem is. And he wants it to be that in front of God and people, that they're going to be accepting. And where is Mitzpah today? So for those of us who are on the Sefer Yoshua trip, when we visited Nebi Samuel, many people argue today that Nebi Samuel, what's called the place of the burial place of Shmuel, is in fact Mitzpah, which is really fascinating. Just across from Al Jib, where we were just there. It's a lot of major events took place there. There is a contending place, which is slightly north of that, which is called Tel El Nasper, which is a large city, which is found, unfortunately, today is surrounded by Ramallah, so it's a little harder to get to today. But some people say that is Mitzpah. This was the gathering point of people during the times of Shoftim and in the times of Shmuel. So this is where he is. He ratifies his rulership. It's not going to just be, I'm walking into battle. He wants the people behind him. He doesn't want just the search committee to come back and tell them. He wants them to see this as well, which is where they were gathered. And this is how it starts. Okay, so now he jumps into his position. He very smoothly sails into his leadership. He's clearly a born leader in terms of charisma and in terms of messaging. And we have this very long conversation which ensues between him and the king of Ammon. Just listen to the way he starts. Listen to the tone of the first foray. In Pasuk Yud Beis, he says, "Vayishlach Yiftach malachim melech b'nei Ammon le'mor." So he sends the king into the king of Ammon, saying, "Ma li v'loch ki v'asa elai lilachem artzi." What's going on with you? What's that you're coming to fight with my land? Notice the way he speaks is very personal. He has now assumed the role. When he says me, he means us, right? This is the grand we. So already his language is lending to grandeur, leadership. He's saying, why are you coming to me? What's your problem with me? He's taking full ownership. And a large conversation ensues. And listen to what the Bnei Ammon accuses him of. He explains that there is a national injustice which has occurred. Which is why he is attacking the nation of Israel. In Pasuk Yud Gimel, Vayom Melech Bnei Ammon el Malachei Yiftach, Ki lakach Yisrael es artzi ba'alosoi mimitzrayim. You took my land when you came up from the land of Egypt. There's an area which is from the Arnon River to the Yabok River, from the Jordan River, and that area I want you to return because it was unjustly taken right now. I mean, so let's just appreciate this. What's going on over here? You see, we need history to understand this. This is like a real social media cheat. Free. Ammon Stein, this is like what's happening right here. It's like they took our land. So let's just examine the accusation and refer back to the history. It's just really important to appreciate the history of this for a moment. And this is why it's so critical to study history, to study maps, and appreciate what's going on over here. Let's go back to before the nation of Israel arrived in the land of Canaan. Right, so I just put a map over here, which I thought just is a helpful map to appreciate. The easiest way to understand what's going on over here on page 7 is to look at the rivers. Okay, so I'm gonna identify 4 rivers, and then we can understand the territories that live within them. Okay, ready? So by the Kinneret Sea, there is a river which moves to the right, which is to the east, and that is called the Yarmuk River. Okay, it's labeled the Yarmuk River. That's river number 1. Okay, below that, just where it says the A in the land of Canaan, it says that is the Yabok stream. Okay, the Yabok stream we've dealt with beforehand, because that, by the way, is where Yaakov Avinu is crossing back and forth that river when he has the nightly specter. That's the Ma'avor Yabok, the Yabok stream. Okay, that also leads into the Jordan River. Then, if you go to midway through the Dead Sea, there is the Arnon River that leads also into the Dead Sea. And the very bottom, where there's the green line, is what's called Nachal Zered, the Zered River. Okay, so you have 4 rivers over here. These 4 rivers are really critical because they divide 4 territories, or actually 5 territories. Above the Yarmuk stream is the Bashan, that's the land of Og. Below the Yarmuk stream and until the Arnon, the Yabok stream, is the area of the Amorites of Sichon. This is pre-Israel being there. Between the Arnon and the Yabok and the Arnon is the land of Ammon, which is the contested territory. Between Arnon and the Zered stream is Moab, and below the Zered stream is Edom. So on the east bank of the Jordan, we have, going northwards, starting in the south, we have Edom, Moab, Ammon, the Amorites of Sichon, the Amorites of Og. Okay, and they're divided by the streams as the territories. That's how it works. It happens to be that before Israel came onto the scene, if you read Parshas Chukas, which is why this is the Haftarah of Parshas Chukas, if you read this before the Israelites even got near to the land of Canaan, there was a skirmish which was happening between the Amorites under Sichon and the Ammonites. This happened well before us. And what happened is that the Ammonites, the Amorites of Sichon, conquered southwards. They crossed the Yabok stream, and they conquered the territory of Ammon, which was right next to the Jordan, the most fertile land they took for themselves. And they reappropriated it as Amorite territory, not Ammonite territory. Okay, right? So do you understand? So the area which is where the word Ya'azer is, so that sort of area of Ammon, the swath of land next to the Jordan River, down all the way to the Arnon stream, is taken by the Amorites, pushing the Ammonites just back. They're now further east. Okay, the capital of Ammon is a place called Rabat Bnei Ammon. Today it's called Amman. Amman, of course, today is the capital of Jordan, and it is called Amman because it is actually built on Rabat Bnei Ammon. That's where Ammon center was. That is further away from the Jordan River because that's where, in fact, the Amorites pushed them. So the Amorites now control this territory, and in fact, in Parshas Chukas, we hear the elegies of we'll call it the local folk songs of those days, talking about as Eish Yatzameh Cheshbon. And we talk about this fire which goes out of Cheshbon, which is an Amorite city, and conquers the areas from the Ammonites. This was a folklore in the time knowing about this conquest. Now comes along the nation of Israel, and they want to enter the land of Israel. They tried entering in the south of Israel in an area called Kedesh. That failed. They did not go that direction. Now they move to the east bank of the Jordan. They first encounter, starting from the south, they encounter the Edomites in Parshas Chukas. And do the Edomites let them cross? No. So they tried to go to Ammon and Moab. Do they let them cross? No. And God says, don't fight with them. They're your kinship. They're a family. Right? Edom, Ammon, and Moab all come from our family. Then they arrive at the areas, they're going round and round and round all the way northwards. They arrive at the land of Sichon, and they send messengers, and Sichon answers by coming out to war with them. They fight against this massive Amorite army, destroy them. Then they fight at the end of Parshas Chukas against Og in the Bashan and conquer the entire northern territory. Which means they now conquer what type of nation? Amorites. These are from the children of Ham, not Ammon and Moab, which are Semites, just by the way. They did not fight with them. God told them not to fight with them. So the territory they conquer includes the territory which was conquered by Sichon originally. Sichon conquered Ammonite territory. What's happening over here? In the revisionist history, what happens is the Melech Bnei Ammon is saying 300 years ago, you, the Israelites, took my territory right adjacent to the Jordan. The real truth is, the Amorites did. You conquered the Amorites, but the Amorites are no longer here to make that for us to make the claim against them. So we'll make the claim against you. It's a very easy thing to do, is to revise history to your own needs. right? And that's what, and this entire conversation is actually Yiftach setting the record straight, saying, no, we didn't touch you. We touched the Amorites. The Amorites knocked you out long before, which is why this is our territory. This is the area of Yazer and Gilad, which we actually own. This is the background. And by the way, this happens all the time. Unfortunately, in Jewish history, I just put in a tweet from Yisrael Katz, who's the defense minister in Israel, and he was commenting about the miraculous resurrection of dead, where the UN adjusted the estimate of women and children killed in Gaza by 50%. Right, if you remember that, right? So the UN is like, we actually overclaimed that while all the protests and the violence against Jews around the world continued. But we forgot, we didn't quite realize that our history wasn't exactly accurate. That's how it works, right? Truth. It takes a while to get its shoes tied while fake news has made its way around the planet. But this is what we're dealing with. In this conversation, Yiftach makes 4 points. I'm not going to go through it inside because it is a long conversation. He makes 4 points. Number one is we didn't conquer your territory, we are conquering Amorite territory. Now, the second one he makes is that it is God who gave it. And in fact, he makes fun of their God. The God of the Moabites and the Ammonites is a God called Chemosh. Right? I put a picture of Chemosh into over here. And we hear about it. If you want to, when we get later on to Malachim, we'll read the Mesha Stili. The Mesha is about king, not Mesha as in Yiddish, like Mesha as Moshe. No, Mesha was the king of Moab, and he writes about how I conquered the land and Chemosh gave me these lands. Right? So right now he says, did Chemosh help you get these lands back? Meaning he's turning the dagger right now. He's like, did your God give it? Our God gave it, which means we own this territory. So theologically we own the territory. He makes another observation. He says, are you stronger than Balak? Right? Melech, who was high, the king of Moab, who tried to conquer us, and look what happened to him. Meaning, you want to go back in history, let me tell you how the roadmap looks, right? Because, Balak he didn't do so well, so don't go this direction. It's a warning. And then fourth, he says there's a statute of limitation. Like, if you were concerned about this territorial dispute, you had 300 years to file a claim in the International Court of Justice. And you didn't. Now suddenly, when we're weak, you're here. He says, so these are the 4 claims that he lays against the Melech ben Ammon. And what is the response of the Melech ben Ammon? He ignores him. He's the last pasuk in the section is how does he say it? He says, "V'lo shama Melech ben Ammon es divrei Yiftach asher shalacho elav." He doesn't care. And then Barbanel points out, it's not that he doesn't care. He says, you are the leader. I don't speak to people who aren't national leaders. Who are you? Who cares? Goodbye and good luck. And that's what the Melech ben Ammon does. It was a bad decision on a policy side, because what happens is the next thing that ensues is a large war. And actually put the map of the war on the next page, where you can sort of see how this goes. They put Eretz Tov a little further east in this case. But you can see the 3-pronged attacks from Gad, where they attack from Mitzpat. This is the assumption that Mitzpat is in the east bank, according to this, and they take over Yotvasa, Yogba and Rabas Bnei Ammon. They take all these Avil Kramim, and they take all these areas Arorer, which are from Ammon, and they make an incredibly successful battle. So the Ammonites do not fare too well. Don't worry, they're not gone. They're going to come back at the times of Shaul HaMelech. We're going to meet Nachash, who's their king later on, and he's going to make a reappearance. But in the meantime, in the middle of this, now it becomes a family drama. What happens? In the battle, Pasuk Lamed, Vayidar Yiftach neder le'al Hashem. He makes a vow, and he says, if you're going to allow me to conquer them, that which comes out to greet me after the war, when I return in peace, I'll bring it as a sacrifice. Clearly in his mind, he's probably thinking that this is going to be some animal that's going to run out of his house, and he's going to make that first animal into a sacrifice. Well, is this a good idea to do? The truth is, we've seen this beforehand in the Torah as an example. So, for instance, Yaakov Avinu was about to go out on a very dangerous journey. At the beginning of Parshas Vayetze, what happens? Vayidar Yaakov neder lemor. Yaakov makes a neder, and he says, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you're going to give me sustenance and bread and covering and food and everything like this, when I come back, v'shavti b'shalom el beis avi v'yashem li lelokim v'aven ozais hashem samti matzeva yu beis elokim. And he says, I'm going to tithe everything that I receive. So he makes a neder. Similarly, later on, when Israel's in Parshas Chukas is about to conquer this area, the king of Arad, which is attacking them and takes the hostage. Jewish hostages is not a new thing, unfortunately. They take a hostage in the nation of Israel. So the nation of Israel makes a neder saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu im tidnasanti tenis ama zebi yadiva charamtias orehem. I'm going to destroy their city. So they make a neder. Later on, when it comes to Chana wanting to have a child, she makes a neder. She's going to give her child to Hashem. Nadarim, when people are in pressing circumstances, is something which is very, very much done. So what he's doing is very much a something which has been done and will be done as well. The complexity is the type of neder that he makes. And the Gemara is very ambivalent about this neder. So the Gemara in Taanis says that there were 3 people who asked inappropriately. They asked things of God that were not the right way to do it. The Gemara in Taanis on Daf Daled Amarav tells us, Amr Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amr Rabbi Yonasan, Shloisha Shalu Shaloi Kahoigen. They asked things that were not appropriate. L'shnaim yeshivu kahoigen, le'echad yeshivu shaloi kahoigen. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu responded very graciously to 2 of them and non-graciously to 1 of them. Ve'eluhein, Eliezer Eved Avram. So what's Eliezer Eved Avram? What's the situation of Eliezer? What happened in that situation? This is in source 20. Eliezer is sitting by the well and he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the young lady who comes out and will give not just me to drink but also my camels to drink, then that'll be the daughter, the one who's going to marry the master's son, Yitzchak. That was not appropriate. The Gemara says, who could have come out? You have no idea who could have come out, right? So, but Hashem still arranged that Rivka came out. Okay. Then the next one is referring to Shaul ben Kish. What does Shaul do? Shaul has a problem. There's this monster called Goliath who's challenging him to a duel. He doesn't want to fight the duel because he knows the entire battle is based on this duel. And so he says, whoever succeeds in overthrowing this giant will get married to my daughter. He, by the way, means his daughter Meirav, but ultimately it turns out to be Michal. He makes an adjustment afterwards. And who ends up being this person is David, this young man, this young boy goes out to meet the giant. The Gemara says, who do you know is going to come out there? You could get some no-good vagabond who goes and kills the giant, and now you're stuck with him being your son-in-law. Right? So the Gemara says, no, that was not appropriate, but Hashem orchestrated that it would be David. So 2 people who asked inappropriately, they didn't know what the outcome would be, but Hashem orchestrated that was the right thing. But the third one is Yiftach. And the third one is Yiftach. You don't make a neder randomly about what walks out of your door because you don't know what's going to walk out of your door. And Hashem lo yeshivu kohagen. Hashem did not protect him in this case as well. Now, by the way, the Mefarshim try to explain this Gemara. They try to say, you know what? Because in the first 2, there was a likelihood that the action they were doing demonstrated the values that were trying to be sought. Meaning, in the end of the day, Rivka was doing a good action. The person who does such a good action is probably going to be a good person. The person who is willing to take on and risk their own life because of a person who's cursing the Marachot Yisrael, Tel Azeka, right, which we just were at just a few months ago, where this battle took place, is probably going to be a person who cares deeply about the national constitution of this country, and would be a good son-in-law. But Yiftach, there's nothing. Right? There's nothing he knows about who's going to come out of the doors of his house. And therefore this is seen as deeply inappropriate, and unfortunately the end is what we're about to read. So the very end of this, we hear about how he goes back home, and the first being that leaves this house is in fact his own daughter. And the moment he sees her, he breaks down, and he tears his clothes, and he says, Aha, biti, my daughter, in Pasuk Lamed Hey, Hachrei Chratani va'at hayisi ba'achrai. You are blocking me up. No, he's not blaming her, he's blaming himself, and she's going to be the outcome of this. And she realizes, he says, I spoke too fast, and you're the result of this. And she realizes this, and she accepts what has happened. And she says to him in Pasuk Lazayim, Tomer el Aviyah, Ye'aseh li hadavar hazeh. Whatever you committed to, you should do. Harpei mimeni shnaim chodashim. Give me 2 months of grace. Let me go to the mountains, weep upon my solace, my virginity, that I'm not going to be able to be married. And he says he gives her these two months. She goes and cries in the mountains. After the 2 months in Pasuk Lametes, and she never got married. He did what he said in his neder. And miyamim yamim avatelach nebenois Yisrael letanois beleveis Yiftach giladi arba'as yamim b'shana. 4 days a year, all the daughters of Israel would go up to the area of Gilad and mourn this tragic loss of his daughter. Terrible, terrible story in this ill-fated valley. Just a few things to be aware of right now. Is the first thing is like, why did he not go back on this vow? Like, what's that? How is this? Like, what's the seriousness of this vow? So it goes back to a prescription. Whenever you see something like this, you need to say, what does the Torah say about this? Meaning, like, what prescription is he taking from the Torah? So if you go to Parshas Bechukos, at the very end, past the Klolos, there's a section called Erchen, where it talks about dedications to God. In that, there's a notion called a cherem. And the Torah tells us about a cherem, and it says, the very top of page 12, kol cherem asher yacharim ish la'Hashem, a person makes a cherem to God, mikol asher loy me'adam ad behema, v'misteach uzasoy loy mocher, v'loy goel, kol cherem kodosh kodoshim hu la'Hashem. Anything that a person says is a cherem is unredeemable. You can't go back on that. It belongs to God. Kol cherem asher yacharam min adam li'ipodeh mos yumas, and if you make a cherem of a human being, that person is going to be killed. So what's the history of this? The Ramban has a long essay over here. And the Ramban, we don't have his commentary on Tanakh, generally speaking, on Torah we do. But we do have moments where he takes a foray into this. So he gives an example. He says, a cherem is where a national leader will declare that something has to happen, and that anybody who's not involved is considered part of that cherem. So as an example, the city of Jericho was declared a cherem, which is why there were no spoils. The whole place was destroyed. There was nothing taken out. That's why when Achon takes from the spoils, he breaks that neder, and that's why Israel's punished later on. And the language uses is achar es Israel. He blocked up Israel, which is the same language that Yiftach is using here. Another example, that's when you make a cherem of a foreign city that you're conquering. There's another type of cherem. If we go to the end of the book of Shoftim, which we're going to get to soon, there's going to be a time where they say we're going to declare war on this erring tribe called Binyamin, and anybody who doesn't come is part of the cherem. One city called Yavesh Gilad did not come to the war effort. They didn't want to fight a civil war, and they were destroyed afterwards. Yavesh Gilad was destroyed. Why? Because they're part of the cherem, this irreversible, so to speak, curse, in a sense, upon people who are not party to this. This is the same thing that Israel is doing about the king of Arad, this Canaanite, or really Amalekite, a nation in Bereishis Rabbah. They say, if you give us this nation, we will make it a cherem, which means they're going to destroy it. This is a cherem. So it sounds like what Yiftach is doing is he's doing this, and he believes in his own mind that this is a cherem, irreversible decree that falls upon his daughter. And what does the Torah say about a cherem that falls upon a person? Mos yumas. So he says, I must sacrifice my daughter, and there's no way out of this. That's what the Ramban says. Take a look at the area in the Ramban where I wrote the mistake of Yiftach, according to the Ramban. V'zeh haya ta'usa shel Yiftach b'beitoi, ki choshav kasher cherem nagid Yisrael. When the king of Israel will make a cherem, chal, it is therefore going to be executed. V'kim lahamis anashim oya over al charamoy chayv. Yes, anybody who is party to it or is responsible to be party to it will have to die if they are not compliant. Kain im ned nadar be'es milchama lases meish anashim zevach yachol neder. He was mistaken. He did not realize ki cherem hamelech v'sanedrin chal ala mordim lechalosam. Or over gezerosam atakarosam. Aval achol haneder lasois olam midavar she'en roi laHashem chas v'chalela. You can't make a cherem on a person who's not involved. Meaning you can say the enemy town is going to be a cherem, we'll destroy it. You can do that. You can say that anybody who doesn't join the war effort is part of the cherem. You can destroy that. That's because they're related to the issue at hand. But anybody in your house is not related to the issue at hand. You don't have the right to make that cherem. So incorrectly, he assumed this notion called cherem was applying to his daughter. Incorrect. And he says, by the way, don't be seduced by the thoughts of the Ibn Ezra. He doesn't like Ibn Ezra in a lot of cases. Listen to what he says in the next paragraph. Don't be seduced by the irrelevant notions of the Ibn Ezra. What does it mean that he made her into a olah, a sacrifice? The Ibn Ezra says, what does it mean? I didn't mean to kill her. I meant that she would be celibate. She would be going to remain by herself, off in the side, not connected to this world. The Ramban says, if that's the case, then why, if it's going to mean the notion of being holy, first of all, we have a person who does this, and her name is Chana. She says, if I have children, my child will be to God. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that he lives in the mountains. It means that he's going to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. That's a decorated, and he became the leader of Israel. That was a great thing. That's what it means. He says, to say that a person is going to live somewhere, distinct and so on. The Ramban says in such sharp language is, why are we mourning on a national level on an annual basis because she didn't get married? Like what? That's not something to celebrate, right? Like, or to commemorate. Like what kind of like corrupt culture is this that would celebrate such a thing? In fact, but the Abarbanel takes this line, and the Abarbanel says, you know what this is like? It was misguided like the Ibn Ezra. And listen to the language he says. Look at this word he uses in source 25. The Kavonasi, Shemizer Lamdu Umas Edom. The nation of Edom learned this practice. Lasois Bate Prishut. Look at that word in the brackets. Cloister. He says, Lenashim Shikansu Sham V'Layetzu Misham Kol Yemehem V'Layiru Ish Ba'od B'Chayim Chayosam. He says, this is where the Christian empire created the notion of cloisters. And this is from the misguided interpretation of Yiftach's vow, which was leaving and being celibate and being completely disassociated. The Ramban says, why would we celebrate that? Right? That's the Ramban's question on this. But that's what's happening over here, which means his intent wasn't to kill her, his intent was to separate her as well. And this being the case, this is what the Mefarshim debate. It is very unclear from the Psukim. Did he sacrifice his daughter? Or did he segregate his daughter? We don't know. He did something which was tragic. He fulfilled his vow. But we don't know, which leads the Mefarshim to guess as to what happens. But the bigger question is why did no one intercede? Why did nobody say Yiftach? Knock it off. Just like Yiftach. This is a neder. Let me tell you how neder and nedarim work. The beginning of Parshas Matos, which you have in your bookshelf, says that if you have a question about a neder you made, go and ask somebody. Go get what's called a Pesach. A Pesach means like this. Is you say, I'm never going to eat chocolate cake the rest of my life. But you didn't realize that when you get married, that your wife is a baker. And she, in fact, is her prime recipe is chocolate cake. You had no idea. So you go to the Chacham or the Beis Din and you present it. You say, I just didn't know the outcome. So then they say, that you were playing with details that weren't available to you. That's called a Pesach. It should not be lost on us that his name is Yiftach, right? Like he should open, but he's not opening it. Why is he not opening it? And in fact, listen to the tragedy of the Gemara. The Gemara says in source 26, the end of that Gemara in Taanis, says, listen to these words, the words of Yirmiyahu. The nation, the Navi says to Israel, Hatzari ein begilad imrofei ein sham? Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? What's it referring to? Could no one resolve this issue for Yiftach in Gilead to allow his daughter to be brought back into society or not to be killed? And in fact, the Bereishis Rabbah says in much sharper terms. I have to read this because it's just so intense. The Midrash says, we're going to meet Pinchas at the end of Sefer Shoftim. He's still around. Could he not be the one to matir the neder, to allow this neder open? Pinchas Omar, hu tzarich li v'ani eilech etzloi. Pinchas says, I am the head scholar of the generation. If this military general has a problem, he should come to my house and make the request. Yiftach Amar, Ani Rosh v'Katzini Yisrael. I'm the Ramatkal, right? I am a decorated war hero. I go to that rabbi, right, to that prophet. Zani olech etzel Pinchas, and they listen to the language of the Midrash. Ben dain dain avda hanarahi. Between those two egos, that's what the Midrash says, she was lost. She was lost. Right? Hada de Braisa Amra ein chayes and the Mechabalta azal barta luta. Okay, now the Midrash says, but don't worry, the tragedy continues. V'shneim nenshu b'damea shel nara. Both of them were punished for the loss of the girl. Yiftach meis b'nishilas evarim. Yiftach died when he had a form of leprosy that his limbs fell off. Why? It says, Makom shaya galech haya ever nishal hemenu. V'yakarvino sasham. How would it sieve? It says that he was buried in the cities of Gilead. How could a person be buried in multiple cities? The answer is is he was dismembered slowly. He slowly lost his limbs and was buried separately because of this relationship to his daughter. Pinchas not lemimenu ruach hakodesh, or to see Pinchas ben Lazar nagid hayaba olam aleihem. Pinchas lost his ruach hakodesh. Pinchas was no longer a leader. This was the moment in time where his lack of leadership warranted the fact that he ultimately lost his ruach hakodesh. He lost his nevuah. Terrible on both sides. By the way, you hear these voices today in society. You hear them in our own voices. We all are like this in some way, where we refuse to move to resolve an issue, to express leadership. I want to conclude just with the following observation, and that is that this idea of child sacrifice in some form or fashion is something which just comes back and back and back in society again and again and again. And the Gemara in the Taanis concludes, Uksiv asher lo tzivisi, lo dibarti, lo olsali. The pasuk in Yirmiyahu says, I did not command, I did not speak about, I did not even imagine this. What's it referring to? The Gemara explains, Asher lo tzivisi ze benoy shel Meisha melech Moav shenem avayikach es benoy b'chor Hashem noch tatov elei olah. There's a terrible situation. There's a war between the Edomites and the Moabites and Israel later on in Melachim. And it says that he killed his son on the ramparts. It sounds like he was killing the hostage of the son of Edom, but it could be that he's actually sacrificing his own son as a war effort. And the Yirmiyahu is saying, I did not command that. I don't want that. I did not speak. Ze Yiftach, about his daughter. Aloy also ze Yitzhak ben Avraham. That's Yitzhak on Har Moriah. What God is saying, in a certain sense, maybe even the Akedah was a demonstration that God does not want child sacrifice. Our children are not our own. We don't succumb to the pagans around us, which is why the Torah again and again talks about what kind of worship is called Molech. Molech is in fact the sacrifice that when they conquered the city of Carthage, which is one of the Phoenician cities, they discovered many urns of ashes, of human ashes. And inscribed on those jars was the letters in Ugaritic of MLK, Martin Luther. No, MLK refers to Molech, the god where you sacrifice your child. In a certain sense, here's the irony, is that here is Yiftach, who's the leader of the generation, who's saving them for God in his expression of God, and yet, still in a certain sense, the pagan culture seeps in to the very society itself. God says, I don't want children sacrificed. You don't have the right to own your children. They're a gift that I gave you to create. And therefore, in a certain sense, the irony is as much as they're saved from the pagan culture, they're actually the victim of that pagan culture at the same time, which is a commentary on the lack of full redemption that Yiftach is able to foster. I believe his name is the most dramatic part of this irony, is that he's the man who cannot open his own problems. He may open the problems of others, but he cannot look inwards, and that in a certain sense is the one of the greatest issues in leadership, is we can solve everybody else's problems, but it's very hard to solve our own. This concludes the section. Rabbi, so thank you. I'm sorry it's a little longer than usual.